The worst decisions, Emma had always believed, were made at 2 a.m. with an empty wine bottle and a broken heart. But she never imagined that her worst decision would become the catalyst for the most extraordinary night of her life. Her fingers had moved across the phone screen with the reckless confidence that only 3 glasses of cheap Merlot could provide. "You up?" She'd typed to the last person she'd texted during work hours, which happened to be Nathaniel Cross, the billionaire CEO of Cross Industries and, unfortunately, her boss, the man whose TED Talks she'd watched obsessively, whose Forbes profile sat bookmarked on her laptop, whose rare smiles in the office made her 26-year-old heart perform embarrassing acrobatics. She'd meant to text her best friend Sarah. Instead, she'd texted the most powerful man in New York City. The message had sent before her wine-soaked brain could stop it. Then came the follow-up, even worse than the first. "Need someone to talk to. Bad night." Emma had stared at her phone in horror for approximately 4 seconds before throwing it across her cramped studio apartment like it was on fire. It had landed somewhere near her thrift store couch, and she'd spent the next hour alternating between mortified tears and hysterical laughter, already composing her resignation letter in her head. This was it. 5 years of clawing her way up from an unpaid internship to junior. Marketing coordinator gone, destroyed by autocomplete and alcohol. Her mother had been right. She should have become a teacher. She'd finally retrieved her phone at 3 a.m., hands shaking, ready to send a groveling apology. But there were no messages, no response. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he'd deleted it without reading. Maybe, if she was incredibly lucky, he'd think it was a wrong number. Emma had crawled into bed fully clothed, mascara streaking her pillowcase, convinced that Monday morning would bring a termination meeting with HR. She didn't expect the knock at her door at 3:47 a.m. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. But then it came again. Firm, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Emma stumbled out of bed, her heart pounding with irrational fear. Who knocked on doors in Manhattan at nearly 4 a.m.? Her mind raced through terrible possibilities. Emergencies, wrong apartments, her landlord finally coming to complain about her singing in the shower. She crept to the door, peering through the peephole with one eye. And there, standing in the fluorescent hallway of her building with its peeling paint and flickering lights, was Nathaniel Cross. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Emma stepped back from the door, convinced the wine had done more damage than she'd thought. Maybe she was hallucinating. Maybe she was still asleep, trapped in some anxiety-induced nightmare where her professional humiliation manifested in physical form. The knock came again. "Emma? It's Nathaniel Cross. I know it's late or early." "I got your message." His voice was real, warm, slightly uncertain, nothing like the commanding tone he used in board meetings. Emma looked down at herself. Wrinkled t-shirt, smudged makeup, no bra, pajama shorts with cartoon cats on them. This couldn't be happening. "I'm going to say something that might sound strange," he continued through the door, "but I promise I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. You said you needed someone to talk to. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Emma's hand moved to the deadbolt before her brain caught up. She opened the door a crack. And there he was, Nathaniel Cross, in dark jeans and a slightly rumpled button-down shirt, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. His usually perfectly styled dark hair was slightly messy, and there was genuine concern in those sharp, blue eyes that had intimidated her during every presentation she'd ever given. "Mr. Cross, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I thought I was texting." "It's okay," he said gently, holding up both hands. "You don't need to apologize. Can I come in? Just for a minute." "I brought coffee." He held up a paper bag from an all-night diner she recognized from the corner, and possibly too many donuts. This was surreal. This was insane. Emma should say no, should maintain some shred of professional dignity. Instead, she opened the door wider. Her apartment was a disaster, the wine bottle on the counter, tissues scattered across the coffee table. Her laptop still open to the email that had started this whole mess. The email from her sister, explaining that their childhood home was being sold, that their mother's medical bills had finally exceeded what the family could handle, that Emma's financial contribution, the one she'd been promising for months, was needed immediately. Nathaniel took it all in without judgment, setting the coffee and donuts on her tiny kitchen counter like he visited cramped studio apartments at 4 a.m. regularly. "I'm not going to ask what happened unless you want to tell me," he said, handing her a coffee that was somehow exactly how she took it. Lots of cream, 2 sugars. Had he noticed during office coffee runs? But I know that particular look. That everything is falling apart and I'm trying to hold it together alone look. I've worn it myself. Emma laughed, a wet, slightly hysterical sound. "You? You're Nathaniel Cross. You're worth billions. You've been on the cover of Time magazine. And I was once a 26-year-old kid watching my mother work 3 jobs while my little brother needed surgery we couldn't afford," he said quietly, sitting on her thrift store couch without hesitation. "Money changes circumstances. Emma, it doesn't erase the memory of feeling helpless." Something in his voice cracked open the careful dam she'd built. Before she knew it, she was telling him everything. Her mother's stroke 2 years ago, the mounting rehabilitation costs, her father's early death that had left them without proper insurance, her sister's 3 kids and barely their income, the weight of being the successful one in the family when her salary barely covered her own rent. She told him about the guilt of working for a company with billion-dollar valuations while her mother did physical therapy in a facility that smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat, about the shame of having a 401k when her family couldn't keep their house, about the crushing pressure of every "you're doing so well" from relatives who didn't know she'd been eating ramen for dinner 4 nights. A week to send money home? Nathaniel listened. Truly listened. Not the way bosses listen during reviews, mentally composing responses. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, nodding at the right moments, his expression shifting from understanding to something that looked like pain. When she finally ran out of words, mascara definitely running again, he was quiet for a long moment. "What's your mother's facility called?" he asked. "Riverside Rehabilitation, why?" He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "And your childhood home, where is it?" "Mr. Cross, I didn't tell you all this to—" "I know," he said, looking up at her. "But here's what you don't know about me. Emma, my company gives away 40% of its profits every year. 40%. Healthcare, education, housing security, those are our focus areas. We have an entire department dedicated to it, and somehow we're always looking at statistics instead of people." He showed her his phone screen, an email to someone named Patricia in Community Investment. "By Monday afternoon, Riverside Rehabilitation will receive a grant for equipment, upgrades, and patient care expansion. Your mother will be on the recipient list for our family medical support program. It covers rehabilitation costs fully. And as for your childhood home?" He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "My brother died when he was 14. The surgery came too late. I bought the hospital where he died 5 years ago and turned it into the best pediatric care facility in the state, free for families who can't afford it. But I never saved my mother's house. She died in a rental apartment. And that's something I'll always regret." His eyes met Emma's. "Let me help save yours." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because somebody should have shown up at 4 a.m. for my mom," he said simply. "Because I've spent 15 years building wealth. And if it can't help the people who actually make my company run, people like you, Emma, who I see staying late every night, who put their heart into work while carrying mountains, I knew nothing about, then what's the point of any of it?" He stood, moving toward the door, then turned back. "Also, for what it's worth, you're not losing your job. You're talented, dedicated, and frankly, the marketing campaign you proposed last month was brilliant. We're implementing it." He smiled. That rare smile that had always made her heart skip. "But maybe update your phone's autocomplete, unless you make a habit of late-night texts to your boss." Emma laughed and cried simultaneously. "Mr. Cross, Nathaniel," he corrected. "At least at 4 a.m. in studio apartments. Monday morning, back to Mr. Cross." After he left, Emma sat on her couch holding her coffee as dawn crept through her window, turning her small apartment golden. She picked up her phone and texted Sarah the real version of what she'd meant to send hours ago. "Something impossible just happened. 3 months later, Emma would stand in her mother's old house, saved, refinanced, secured, and understand that the worst decision of her life had actually been the universe's strange way of connecting one person's broken heart to another person's healed one. That kindness wasn't about grand gestures or public charity, but about someone powerful, enough to change lives, choosing to show up at 4 a.m. with coffee and donuts and the radical empathy of remembering what it felt like to be helpless. She never did update her autocomplete. Some accidents she'd learned were actually meant to happen.